In itself. In itself, Jasper's scarf seems inconspicuous. Mr. Dickens notes on the day of Edwin's disappearance that the mere mechanism of Jasper's throat is a little tender, for he wears, both with his singing robe and with his ordinary dress, a large black scarf of strong, close woven silk, slunk loosely round his neck. Look at that paragraph. Do we take his scarf in itself? Do we not take it in context, the paragraph? These results are probably attained through a grand composure of the spirits. That's how the paragraph begins. The previous paragraph, which defines these results, Mr. Jasper is in beautiful voice this day. In the pathetic supplication to have his heart inclined to keep this law, he quite astonishes his fellows. By his melodious power, he has never sung difficult music with such skill and harmony as in this day's anthem. His nervous temperament is occasionally prone to take difficult music a little too quickly. Today his time is perfect. Back to these results, which is the next paragraph. This is on page 180, by the way, in the chapter, When Shall These Three Meet Again? These results are probably attained through a grand composure of the spirits. Then we get to the business about the mere mechanism. What about this composure? On the next page, he's having a conversation with Chris Barkle. This is better, says Mr. Chris Barkle, stopping at the steps of his door to shake hands, than I could have hoped. Why, naturally, returns Jasper, you had but little reason to hope that I should become more like myself. You are always training yourself to be, mind and body, as clear as crystal, and you always are, and never change, whereas I am a muddy, solitary, moping weed. However, I have got over that mope. And on the previous page, we read, well, as he says it himself, perfect self-command. I mean, it's actually the minor canon who's using that language. I am wonderfully well, says Jasper. Chris Barkle has inquired as to how he's feeling that day. Nothing unequal, says the minor canon, with a smooth motion of his hand. Nothing unsteady, nothing forced, nothing avoided. All thoroughly done in a masterly manner, with perfect self-command. That's a comment upon the conduct of Jasper. And Jasper's response is, thank you, I hope so, if it is not too much to say. One would think, Jasper, you'd been trying a new medicine for that occasional indisposition of yours. Some medicine other than opium. Some medicine other than opium. Religion? We'll get back to that. Return to the passage just for a moment. After parting with Chris Barkle to meet with Edwin and Neville, Jasper, quote, pauses for an instant in the shelter to pull off that great black scarf and hang it in a loop upon his arm. For that brief time, his face is knitted and stern. He is composed. That composure that we read about. Self-command. I think these are just other terms for what we were talking about last week under the rubric resolution, right? And perhaps one could argue that Jasper gives resolution a bad name. But that's just in passing. Let's get back to the claim that religion, the opium of the masses, is or has become, and we see it happening, we see the results of its having become in this scene. It's become Jasper's opium, replacing opium. Jasper's opium that replaces opium. Religion. What religion? Well, Jasper, some have argued, famously this fellow named Duffield back in the 1930s, that Jasper's a thuggy, and that the religion that has become his replacement for opium, though itself a kind of opiate, is Hinduism. Hinduism is the great horror of the book. Religion generally? Well, we'll get back to that one. Hinduism particularly? Because after all, Hinduism gives rise to thuggy culture. What's a thuggy? Well, I'm going to read through this for you, and maybe you'll follow along. This is taken from Wendy S. Jacobson, John Jasper, and Thucky from way back in the 1970s in the eminent literary critical journal, The Modern Language Review. Quote, the thugs were members of a savage brotherhood of murderers. What's this got to do with religion? Keep going. Whose methods were exposed during the British rule in India. In 1829, the Supreme Government of India found themselves at grips with a secret cult of religious assassins, among whom the craft of murder was sanctified as an ancestral right. A special police department devoted to the suppression of thuggee which is the term applied to the cult, was established, and the work was completed only as late as 1904. Votaries of Kali, goddess of destruction, the thugs did not murder but sacrificed their victims to their goddess according to a prescribed method. And here's Duffield. Howard Duffield explains that, quote, murder by a thug was invariably a mysterious disappearance. Travelers who set out upon a journey never reached their journey's end. Neighbors vanished. Soldiers on furlough failed to return to the ranks. Nothing was ever known concerning a strangler's victim except that he was gone. And there are actual historical contemporaneous accounts of these episodes in which travelers out on the Great Trunk Road, famous road in northern India, would be met by a seemingly friendly group of folks who did not seem poor, seemed fairly well off, and seemed fairly elegant in many ways and quite presentable, these people. And there was nothing in their appearance or in their conduct that was frightening, but things would happen that evening, late, when they went to bed, and the group would be gone the next day, and there would be carnage left in their wake. As Jacobson continues, the number of disappearances grew to such proportions that the government was forced to undertake investigations which revealed facts so abhorrent that, until they were proven beyond a shadow of a doubt, the government refused to admit the existence of such crime. During two-thirds of the 19th century, the period spanned by the life of Dickens, one of the outstanding features of English rule in India was this effort to suppress the fanzigars, popularly known as thugs. And I can't help but pause and wonder whether you also had the experience of thugs as a young person in junior high, especially. I know that we called, like, the dudes you'd run into in the bathroom, who you weren't happy to run into them. We called them thugs. The discovery, history, and suppression of the thugs was reported in England and Europe with excitement in the gangs and their particular methods, not to mention the romantic tales and legends that grew up around them became common knowledge, as is evidenced in an article in Household Words, published some 20 years after the establishment of the Special Police Department in India. So then, is Jasper a thug? Has he become one, a devotee of Kali? Defer that question. Nate, who will be reporting on Dickens's Orientalism, he'll explain what that is. Nate may take it up. Let's just say that Jasper is. Well then, what does that say about finding religion? We tend, do we not, to think of one's finding God, finding religion, as at least a benign event in one's life, even if we cannot go along with those who would deem it a salvific one. What is Dickens saying about it? What is he saying about religion, quote, in itself, here represented by a scarf that should not be taken, as we have seen, in itself? And is he, Dickens, saying it about Christianity as well as Hinduism? Presumably he is. Presumably, therefore, we have a book here, profoundly distrustful of the religious temperament. Presumably indeed, we're presuming a lot, aren't we? Kali, worshippers of Kali, somehow standing for the religion of Hinduism, or I should say the religions of Hinduism. There are those who have said that Hinduism is 100 different religions, share a core, but whose differences should not be overlooked. Christianity, of course, can generalize from an indictment of Hinduism to an indictment of religion in general, which of course would include Christianity. Immediately you had to be thinking, wait, what about Chris Sparkle, right? I'll bet that objection occurred to you already. Chris Sparkle, a thug, pretty handy with his mitts, as most thugs are. But that's okay, he's supposed to be, for he's maybe you've seen this phrase before, a muscular Christian. As David Faulkner argues, an exemplary muscular Christian, the Reverend Septimus Crisparkle, presides over this novel. From the outset of mystery, Septimus Crisparkle, fair and wholesome, appears a pure specimen of the genus muscular Christian, a cultural ideal of Anglo-Saxon vigor and virtue, and an embodiment of, quote, the cultural values expressed in Christian manliness. Speaking of cults, a benign cult, a benign Victorian Christian cult, so to speak, or movement, maybe is a slightly less invidious term to apply to this group of Christians who called themselves muscular Christians, they existed. This is a real thing that happened in the Victorian era. And the Victorians would have, knowledgeable Victorians who knew their culture would immediately have recognized Septimus as an embodiment of this particular variety. So this is taken into account a challenge, isn't it, to the claim offered in over the course of the last couple of slides. Oh, I know what you're thinking now. Wait, I might be presuming. But you may be thinking this. Oh, I get it. Going into battle against horror, I want crisp gargle by my side, maybe with the gloves off. The book then is all about good religion versus bad religion. It's not about religion generally. It's about religion, but it's not an indictment of religion generally. The book is, in fact, got a good religion, it's got a bad religion. It's got a good local religion, got a bad foreign religion. Wish it'd stay in its place out there, over there, if not down under. Damn, not thus. But this empire, in this one respect, keeps bringing back things, bad things, bringing back with it as the imperialists return from their overseas assignments. Not just the imperial spoils, but what's foreign, what is other, and what despoils. Thus, we have another book registering the horror of, wait, Nate will be talking about this, I'll bet. But wait, what about passages such as the one in chapter 9, Birds in the Bush? Passages of which there are many, and passages which should give us pause. This is the one in which Mr. Grugy is calling on Jasper after calling on Rosa, visits a cathedral, and, quote, pauses at the great western folding door of the cathedral, which stood open on the fine and bright, though short-lived, afternoon for the earring of the place. Dear me, said Mr. Grugius, peeping in, it's like looking down the throat of old time. Old time heaved a moldy sigh from tomb and arch and vault, and gloomy shadows began to deepen in corners, and damps began to rise from green patches of stone, and jewels cast upon the pavement of the nave from stained glass by the declining sun began to perish. Within the grille gate of the chancel, up the steps surmounted loomingly by the fast darkening organ, white robes could be dimly seen, and one feeble voice rising and falling in a cracked, monotonous mutter could at intervals be faintly heard. In the free outer air, the river, the green pastures, and the brown arable lands, the teeming hills and dales were reddened by the sunset, while the distant little windows and windmills and farm homesteads shone patches of bright beaten gold. In the cathedral, all became gray, murky, and sepulchral, and the cracked, monotonous mutter went on like a dying voice until the organ and the choir burst forth and drowned it in a sea of music. Then the sea fell, and the dying voice made another feeble effort, and then the sea rose high and beat its life out, and lashed the roof, and surged among the arches, and pierced the heights of the great tower, and then the sea was dry, and all was still.